The snow came to Quartzsite, Arizona, only once every decade or so. And on this particular February day in 1883, it fell in thick white sheets that transformed the desert town into something unrecognizable. Penelope Lambert stood shivering on a wooden platform in the center of town square, her thin cotton dress doing nothing to protect her from the bitter cold that seemed to cut straight through to her bones. Around her, a crowd of rough men gathered, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air as they shouted numbers and jeered, treating her like she was nothing more than livestock at a cattle auction. She had been sold 3 times already in her 22 years, and each time she had promised herself it would be the last. But desperation and circumstance had a way of making liars out of everyone. Her dark hair hung limp and wet against her pale cheeks, and her fingers had gone numb an hour ago. But she kept her chin raised and her green eyes fixed on the horizon, refusing to let these men see her break. The auctioneer, a fat man named Cornelius who smelled of whiskey and tobacco, grabbed her arm roughly and turned her in a slow circle so the assembled men could get a better look at what they were bidding on. She wanted to wrench her arm away, to spit in his face and tell him exactly what she thought of him and every other man in this God-forsaken town, but she knew better. The last girl who had fought back had been beaten so badly she could not walk for a week, and Penelope had learned long ago that survival meant choosing your battles carefully. So she stood still and let them examine her like she was a horse they were considering purchasing. Let them call out crude comments about her figure and speculate about what she would be worth in their beds or their kitchens, or whatever other purpose they had in mind. $200, someone called from the back of the crowd, and Penelope's stomach turned. $200 was more than she had ever been sold for before, which meant whoever was buying her had specific plans that probably did not involve simple housework. $250. Another voice countered, this one belonging to a scarred man in the front row who had been leering at her since she had been dragged onto the platform. The bidding continued, climbing higher and higher, and Penelope felt a strange detachment settle over her, as if she were watching this happen to someone else from very far away. She had used this technique before, this ability to separate her mind from her body, to float somewhere above the ugliness of her reality, and observe it without feeling the full weight of it. It was the only way she had survived this long, and she suspected it was the only way she would continue to survive whatever came next. $500. The voice that cut through the crowd was different from the others, deeper and quieter, but it carried an authority that made everyone fall silent and turn to look. Penelope's eyes followed theirs and landed on a tall man standing at the edge of the gathering, his broad-shouldered frame wrapped in a heavy sheepskin coat and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his eyes. Even from a distance, she could see that he was younger than most of the other men here, probably no more than 26 or 27. And there was something in the way he held himself that spoke of quiet confidence rather than the loud bravado that characterized so many of the cowboys and miners who populated this territory. Cornelius's eyes lit up with greedy delight. $500 from the gentleman in the back. Do I hear $550? The scarred man who had been bidding earlier scowled and opened his mouth, but the tall man stepped forward into better view, and whatever the scarred man saw in his face made him close his mouth again and take a step back. There was something about the newcomer that commanded respect or perhaps caution, and the crowd seemed to sense it too, because no one else made another bid. 500 going once, going twice, sold to the gentleman for $500. Cornelius brought his hand down with a sharp crack, and just like that, Penelope's fate was sealed once more. The tall man moved through the crowd with purposeful strides, pulling a thick roll of bills from inside his coat and counting out the money into Cornelius's eager hands. Up close, Penelope could see that his face was weathered but handsome, with strong features and eyes the color of slate that seemed to take in everything without revealing anything. He had a few days' worth of stubble on his jaw and a small scar above his left eyebrow, and when he finally looked up at her, his expression was impossible to read. "Get down from there before you freeze to death," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. He shrugged off his heavy coat and held it up to her. "Put this on." Penelope stared at him, uncertain. In her experience, kindness from men always came with strings attached, usually ones that tightened around your neck when you least expected it. But she was so cold that her entire body ached with it, and the coat looked warm and thick. So after a moment's hesitation, she stepped down from the platform and let him drape it over her shoulders. The wool was still warm from his body heat, and it smelled of leather and pine and something else she could not quite identify. Something clean and masculine that made her feel oddly safe, despite everything she knew about the world and the men in it. "Thank you," she managed through chattering teeth. He grunted in response and turned to Cornelius. "I will need the papers." "What papers?" Cornelius asked, though his shifty eyes suggested he knew exactly what papers were being requested. "The indenture contract, or whatever legal document you are using to justify this circus," the man said, his tone hardening. "I want proof that this transaction is legitimate so there are no questions later." Cornelius grumbled, but produced a crumpled piece of paper from his vest pocket, and the tall man examined it carefully before folding it and tucking it into his own pocket. Then he turned back to Penelope and gestured toward a horse tied to a post nearby, a magnificent bay gelding with intelligent eyes and a calm demeanor. "Can you ride?" "Yes," Penelope said, though in truth she had only ridden a handful of times in her life, and never in weather like this. He studied her for a moment as if trying to determine whether she was telling the truth, then gave a short nod and untied the horse. "His name is Ranger. He has got a gentle mouth and good sense. Just hold on and let him follow my horse. We are not going far." He had a second horse, a gray mare, tied further down the street, and he led both animals through the thinning crowd with Penelope following close behind, still wrapped in his coat. She could feel dozens of eyes on her back, could hear the whispered speculations about who the stranger was and what he planned to do with his purchase, but she kept her gaze forward and focused on putting one foot in front of the other. The snow was still falling, already several inches deep on the ground, and her worn boots were soaked through, making every step feel like she was walking through ice water. When they reached the gray mare, the man swung up into the saddle with practiced ease, then looked down at her. "Do you need help mounting?" "I can manage," Penelope said, though the truth was she was not entirely sure she could. Her fingers were so numb she could barely feel them, and her legs felt weak and shaky from standing in the cold for so long. Still, she did not want to appear helpless in front of this stranger who now owned her, so she grabbed the saddle horn and tried to pull herself up onto Ranger's back. She made it about halfway before her strength gave out and she slipped back down, nearly falling into the snow. Before she could try again, strong hands gripped her waist and lifted her easily onto the horse's back, settling her into the saddle as if she weighed nothing at all. The man's touch was impersonal but firm, and he made sure she had her feet in the stirrups and her hands on the reins before he stepped back. "If you start to slip, call out. Ranger will stop, but I would rather know before you hit the ground." He returned to his own horse and gathered the reins, then glanced back at her. "Stay close and try to keep up. The ranch is about 3 miles outside of town." With that, he nudged the gray mare into a walk, and Ranger followed without needing any encouragement from Penelope. She gripped the saddle horn with both hands and tried to find her balance, tried to remember the few riding lessons she had received as a child back in Missouri, before her father lost everything at cards and drank himself to death, leaving her and her mother to fend for themselves in a world that had little mercy for women alone. Her mother had died 2 years later from pneumonia, and Penelope had been on her own ever since, drifting from town to town, taking whatever work she could find and trying to stay one step ahead of starvation and worse. The ride to the ranch seemed to take forever, though it was probably no more than 45 minutes. The snow continued to fall and the wind picked up, driving icy crystals into Penelope's face and making it difficult to see more than a few yards ahead. She hunched down in the saddle and buried her face in the collar of the borrowed coat, trusting Ranger to follow the mare through the white landscape. Her entire body felt frozen, and she had long since lost feeling in her hands and feet, but she clung to the saddle horn and kept herself upright through sheer force of will. Finally, just when she thought she could not hold on any longer, a cluster of buildings emerged from the snow ahead. The man led them toward a large barn, and Penelope felt a surge of relief so intense it almost brought tears to her eyes. They were going to get out of this storm, at least temporarily, and that was more than she had dared to hope for when she had been standing on that platform in town. The man dismounted and quickly opened the barn doors, then came back to help Penelope down from Ranger. This time she did not protest when he reached up and lifted her from the saddle, because she honestly was not sure her legs would hold her if she tried to dismount on her own. He set her on her feet inside the barn, and she swayed slightly before catching her balance. "Sit down over there," he said, pointing to a bench against the wall. "I need to take care of the horses, and then we will get you warmed up." Penelope did as she was told, sinking onto the bench and watching as he efficiently unsaddled both animals and rubbed them down with handfuls of straw, checking their hooves and giving them each a measure of grain and fresh water. He moved with the easy competence of someone who had been around horses his entire life, and despite her exhaustion and fear, she found herself wondering about him, about who he was, and why he had spent $500 to buy her freedom, or whatever he thought he was buying. When the horses were settled, he hung the tack on pegs and turned his attention to her. "Can you walk, or should I carry you?" "I can walk," Penelope said, though even to her own ears, her voice sounded weak and unconvincing. He crossed the barn and crouched down in front of her, his gray eyes studying her face with an intensity that made her want to look away. "You are hypothermic. Your lips are blue and you are shaking like a leaf. I am going to take you up to the house and get you warm, and I need you to trust that I am not going to hurt you. Can you do that?" Penelope wanted to laugh at the absurdity of the question. Trust him. She did not trust anyone, had not trusted anyone since her mother died, and she certainly did not trust a man who had just purchased her at an auction like she was a piece of property. But she also did not have much choice in the matter, and the practical part of her brain that had kept her alive, this long recognized that if he had wanted to hurt her, he could have done so already. "I do not have much choice, do I?" she said. Something flickered in his eyes, might have been disappointment or frustration, she could not tell. "No, I suppose you do not. But for what it is worth, I give you my word that you are safe with me. My name is Gabriel Jennings and I own this ranch. I bought you because what was happening in town was wrong and I had the means to stop it. That is all." He stood and offered her his hand, and after a moment, Penelope took it and let him pull her to her feet. Her legs trembled beneath her, but she forced herself to stand straight and meet his eyes. "My name is Penelope Lambert, and I do not believe in knights in shining armor or men who do good deeds without expecting something in return." Gabriel's expression did not change, but something in his posture seemed to relax slightly, as if her honesty had somehow put him more at ease than gratitude would have. "Fair enough. I am not a knight, and I do not own any shining armor. But I do have a warm house and a housekeeper who makes excellent stew, and right now, that is what you need. So let me help you up to the house, and we can discuss the rest later when you are not in danger of losing your toes to frostbite." He was right about the frostbite, and Penelope knew it. So she nodded and let him guide her out of the barn and across a short expanse of snow-covered ground to a sprawling ranch house built of timber and stone. Smoke curled from the chimney, and warm yellow light glowed in the windows, and the sight of it made something in Penelope's chest ache with a longing she had not allowed herself to feel in years. A longing for warmth and safety, and something that felt like home. Gabriel pushed open the front door and called out, "Martha, I need your help." A woman appeared from the back of the house, wiping her hands on her apron. She was perhaps 50 years old, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a neat bun, and a round, pleasant face that creased with concern when she saw Penelope. "Lord have mercy, Gabriel. What have you brought home now?" "Someone who needs help," Gabriel said simply. "She has been standing in the snow for hours, and she is half frozen. Can you draw a warm bath and find some dry clothes while I get the fire built up?" Martha did not ask any more questions. She hurried forward and wrapped a supporting arm around Penelope's waist, taking some of her weight. "Come with me, child. We will get you sorted out. Gabriel, you bring up some hot water from the kitchen once I have got her settled." Penelope found herself being guided up a staircase and down a hallway to a bedroom with a large copper bathtub in the corner. Martha worked quickly, pouring buckets of water that had been warming by the stove into the tub and testing the temperature with her hand. "Not too hot to start with," she murmured, more to herself than to Penelope. "We need to warm you up gradually, or it will hurt something fierce." She helped Penelope out of her wet clothes, and if she had any opinions about the bruises on Penelope's arms or the way her ribs showed through her pale skin, she kept them to herself. Instead, she simply helped her into the bath and wrapped a thick towel around her shoulders, then went to fetch more water. The warmth of the bath was almost painful at first, just as Martha had predicted, and Penelope had to bite her lip to keep from crying out as feeling returned to her frozen extremities in waves of burning sensation. But gradually, the pain faded and was replaced by blessed warmth, and she sank deeper into the water and let her eyes drift closed, too exhausted to think about what came next, or what Gabriel Jennings might expect from her now that he had bought her. Martha returned with more hot water and added it to the bath, then perched on a stool nearby and studied Penelope with kind but assessing eyes. "Gabriel is a good man," she said quietly. "I have worked for him for 5 years now, and in all that time, he has never done anything dishonorable or cruel. Whatever he told you about why he bought you, it is the truth. He does not lie." Penelope opened her eyes and looked at the older woman. "Why should I believe you?" "For all I know, you are just trying to make me compliant." Martha smiled sadly. "You are right not to trust easily. I can see you have learned that lesson the hard way, but I am telling you the truth nonetheless, and in time, you will see it for yourself. For now, just rest and get warm. There is food waiting when you are ready, and a clean bed if you want to sleep. No one will bother you, and no one will make demands of you tonight. That much I can promise." She left the room then, closing the door softly behind her, and Penelope was alone with her thoughts and her slowly warming body. She stayed in the bath until the water began to cool, then climbed out and dried herself with the towel Martha had left. There was a nightgown laid out on the bed, soft white flannel that looked like it had never been worn, and Penelope pulled it on gratefully, marveling at the simple luxury of clean, dry fabric against her skin. A knock on the door made her jump. "It is just me," Martha called. "I have brought you some food." "Come in," Penelope said, and Martha entered carrying a tray laden with a bowl of steaming stew, thick slices of bread, and a cup of tea. The smell alone was enough to make Penelope's stomach clench with hunger. Martha set the tray on a small table by the window. "Eat as much as you can, but do not rush it, or you will make yourself sick. I will be downstairs if you need anything. The chamber pot is under the bed, and there are extra blankets in the wardrobe if you get cold in the night." "Thank you," Penelope said, and this time she meant it, though the words still felt strange on her tongue. Martha smiled and patted her shoulder gently before leaving again. Penelope sat down at the table and began to eat, forcing herself to take small bites and chew slowly, even though she wanted to devour everything in front of her. The stew was rich and flavorful, full of tender beef and vegetables, and the bread was fresh and warm. It was the best meal she had eaten in longer than she could remember, and by the time she finished, her eyes were heavy with exhaustion, and her body felt warm and heavy and almost content. She climbed into the bed and pulled the thick quilts up to her chin, sinking into the softness of the mattress. Through the window, she could see the snow still falling, blanketing the world in white, and for the first time in a very long time, she felt something that might have been hope stirring in her chest. Maybe Gabriel Jennings was telling the truth. Maybe he really had bought her just to help her. Or maybe this was all a trick and tomorrow would bring fresh horrors. Either way, there was nothing she could do about it tonight, so she closed her eyes and let sleep claim her. When Penelope woke, pale sunlight was streaming through the window and the storm had passed. For a moment, she did not remember where she was, and then it all came rushing back: the auction, the snow, Gabriel Jennings and his quiet promise that she was safe. She sat up slowly, her body stiff and sore but warm, and looked around the room in the daylight. It was simply furnished but clean and comfortable, with whitewashed walls and curtains at the window. Someone had brought up her clothes from yesterday, washed and dried and folded neatly on a chair, and next to them was a dress she did not recognize. A simple calico print in blue and white that looked like it would fit her reasonably well. There was another knock on the door, and Martha's voice called out, "Are you awake, dear? I have brought you breakfast." "Yes, come in," Penelope said, and Martha entered with another tray, this one holding eggs and bacon and toast and more of that wonderful tea. "You slept for 14 hours, Martha said, setting the tray down. "Gabriel wanted to check on you, but I told him to let you rest. How are you feeling?" "Better," Penelope admitted. "Warmer, at least, and less like I might die at any moment." Martha chuckled. "That is a good start. Gabriel wants to speak with you after you have eaten and dressed, if you feel up to it. He is down in his study. I will show you the way when you are ready." Penelope ate her breakfast and dressed in the calico dress, which fit surprisingly well, though it was a little loose in the waist. She braided her hair and pinned it up as best she could without a mirror, then followed Martha downstairs to a room at the back of the house. Martha knocked once and opened the door. "She is here, Gabriel." Gabriel was sitting behind a large desk covered with papers and ledgers, but he rose when Penelope entered and gestured to a chair across from him. "Please, sit down. How are you feeling?" "Better, thank you," Penelope said, settling into the chair and folding her hands in her lap. She was determined to appear calm and composed, even though her heart was racing. Gabriel sat back down and picked up the crumpled piece of paper she had seen him take from Cornelius yesterday. He studied it for a moment, then looked up at her. "According to this document, You were indentured to a man named Harold Benson in payment of a debt of $300. Is that accurate? Penelope's jaw tightened. Harold Benson owned the boarding house where I was working. When business slowed down during the winter and he could not pay his own debts, he decided to sell me to cover his losses. I did not owe him anything. He just took advantage of the fact that I had nowhere else to go and no one to protect me. Gabriel's expression darkened. That is what I suspected. This document is not worth the paper it is written on. Indenture contracts require the consent of both parties, and there is no evidence of your signature or agreement here. Cornelius was running an illegal operation, and he is going to answer for it. You are going to report him. Penelope asked, surprised. Already did. I sent a message to the territorial marshal this morning. What Cornelius was doing is slavery in all but name, and it has no place in this territory or any other. He leaned forward, his gray eyes intense. But that is not why I asked you here. I want to make something very clear to you, Miss Lambert. As far as I am concerned, this contract is void. You are not my property, and you do not owe me anything. I bought you out of that auction because it was wrong, not because I expect anything from you in return. Penelope stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. I do not understand. You spent $500. Why would you do that if you do not want anything from me? Gabriel ran a hand through his dark hair, looking frustrated but not with her. Because I have seen too much injustice in this world to stand by and watch it happen when I have the means to stop it. My mother was sold into an indenture contract when she was 16 years old. She worked herself to death trying to pay off a debt that kept growing no matter how hard she worked. I was 10 years old when she died, and I swore then that if I ever had the chance to help someone in the same situation, I would do it. So when I rode into Quartzsite yesterday and saw what was happening in the town square, I did not even think about it. I just acted. The raw honesty in his voice made something in Penelope's chest tighten. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that there really were people in the world who did good things without expecting payment, but it went against everything her experience had taught her. What happens now? She asked quietly. That is up to you, Gabriel said. You are free to leave whenever you want. I can give you enough money to get to California or back east or wherever you want to go, and I will arrange safe passage for you. Or if you prefer, you can stay here. I could use help around the ranch. Martha is getting older and the house is more than she can manage on her own, and I have a lot of work coming up with spring calving season. I will pay you fair wages, and you will have your own room and meals provided. But it is your choice, Penelope. You get to decide what happens next in your life. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Penelope felt tears prick at her eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. I do not know what to say. You do not have to say anything right now. Take your time and think about it. There is no rush. Gabriel stood and moved to the window, looking out at the snow-covered landscape. I know you have no reason to trust me, and I do not blame you for that, but I hope that in time you will see that I mean what I say. You are free now, Penelope. Now choose your life. The echo of his words stayed with Penelope for the rest of the day, as she helped Martha with simple tasks around the house, and tried to wrap her mind around the sudden shift in her circumstances. Gabriel had given her freedom, real freedom, the kind she had not known since she was a child. She could leave, could take his money and disappear, start over somewhere far away from Quartzsite and the memories of that platform and the cold snow and the jeering men. But something made her hesitate, made her want to stay, at least for a little while, and see if Gabriel Jennings was really as honorable as he seemed. Over the next few weeks, Penelope settled into a routine at the ranch. She helped Martha with cooking and cleaning, learned how to tend the chickens and gather eggs, and gradually began to venture outside to help with other chores. Gabriel kept his distance, treating her with unfailing courtesy, but never pressing her for conversation or company. He worked from dawn until dusk managing the ranch, riding out to check on the cattle and repair fences and handle the 100 other tasks that came with running a spread this size. Slowly, Penelope began to relax, began to believe that maybe this was real and maybe she really was safe here. The bruises on her arms faded, and she gained weight from Martha's good cooking, and color returned to her cheeks. She found herself watching Gabriel when he came in for meals, noticing the way he always thanked Martha for the food, the way he was patient with the ranch hands and fair in his dealings with everyone. He was not like any man she had ever known, and that scared her almost as much as it intrigued her. One evening in late March, after the last of the snow had melted, and the first hints of spring were beginning to show in the greening grass and budding trees, Penelope found Gabriel in the barn tending to a mare who was about to foal. She stood in the doorway watching him, the way his hands moved gently over the horse's swollen belly, the way he murmured soft reassurances that seemed to calm the nervous animal. "Will she be all right?" Penelope asked, stepping into the barn. Gabriel looked up, seeming surprised to see her there. "I think so. This is her third foal, so she knows what to do, but I like to be nearby just in case there are complications." Penelope moved closer, drawn by curiosity and something else she could not quite name. "Can I help? You can keep me company if you want. It might be a long night." Gabriel gestured to a pile of clean straw against the wall. "Make yourself comfortable." Penelope settled into the straw and watched as Gabriel continued to check on the mare, his movements confident and sure. "Where did you learn so much about horses?" she asked after a while. "My father was a horsebreaker. He worked on various ranches throughout Texas and New Mexico territory, and I grew up following him around and learning the trade. When he died, I used the money he left me to buy this land and start my own operation. That was 6 years ago. You ever miss Texas?" Gabriel considered the question. "Sometimes, but this place feels more like home than anywhere else ever has. I built this ranch from nothing, and every fence post and every building and every head of cattle represents something I accomplished with my own hands. That means something to me." Penelope could hear the pride in his voice, and she understood it. "I have never had anything that was truly mine," she said quietly. "Even when I was a child, everything we owned could be taken away at any moment, and usually was. I do not know what it feels like to have a place that belongs to you." Gabriel was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was gentle. "This place could belong to you too if you wanted it to. You have been working hard these past weeks, and Martha tells me she does not know how she managed without you. You have earned your place here, Penelope. This could be your home, for as long as you want it to be." The words struck something deep inside Penelope, and she felt tears threatening again. She blinked them back and wrapped her arms around her knees. "Why are you so kind to me? What do you get out of it?" Gabriel looked at her, and in the dim light of the barn, his gray eyes seemed to glow. "I get the satisfaction of knowing that I helped someone who needed help. And if I am being completely honest, I get your company, which I have come to value more than I probably should." Penelope's breath caught. "What do you mean?" He looked away, focusing his attention on the mare. "I mean that I have spent the last 6 years building this ranch and working myself half to death, and I did not realize how lonely I was until you came here. I like hearing your voice in the house. I like seeing you at the dinner table. I like knowing that you are here, safe and well. And I know that probably makes you uncomfortable, given the circumstances of how we met, so I have been trying very hard to keep my distance and give you space. But you asked, so I am telling you the truth." Penelope's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. "I do not find it uncomfortable," she said softly. "I find it terrifying because I have learned that trusting people only leads to pain. But I also find it wonderful because no one has ever cared about my safety or my happiness the way you seem to, and I do not know what to do with that." Gabriel turned back to her, and the look on his face made her chest ache. "You do not have to do anything with it, Penelope. I am not asking you for anything. I just wanted you to know how I feel so that there are no secrets between us." Before Penelope could respond, the mare let out a low whinny and began to shift restlessly in her stall. Gabriel immediately turned his attention back to the animal, and Penelope moved closer to see what was happening. Over the next hour, she watched in awe as the foal was born, a perfect little colt with long, spindly legs and a black coat that gleamed wetly in the lantern light. Gabriel worked quietly and efficiently, helping the mare through the process and making sure both mother and baby were healthy once it was done. "He is beautiful," Penelope whispered, watching as the colt struggled to his feet on shaky legs and began to nurse. "He is," Gabriel agreed. "And he is going to be a fine horse someday, strong bloodlines." He stripped off his work gloves and wiped his hands on a rag, then turned to Penelope with a tired smile. "Thank you for staying. It was good to have company." They walked back to the house together through the darkness, and when they reached the porch, Penelope stopped and turned to face him. "Gabriel, I need to tell you something." He waited, his expression patient and open. "I want to stay," Penelope said, the words tumbling out before she could second-guess herself. "Not just for a little while, but for as long as you will have me. This is the first place I have felt safe since my mother died, and you are the first person who has treated me like I matter. I do not know what the future holds, and I am still scared to trust anyone completely, but I want to try. I want to make a life here if you will let me." Gabriel's smile widened, and the joy in his eyes was unmistakable. "Nothing would make me happier, Penelope. Welcome home." As spring turned to summer, Penelope's life at the ranch took on a comfortable rhythm. She worked alongside Martha in the house and garden, learning to bake bread and preserve vegetables and sew quilts. She also spent more time outside, helping with the chickens and learning to milk the cow, and even trying her hand at riding again, this time on a gentle mare named Daisy that Gabriel had chosen specifically for her. Gabriel continued to work long hours, but he made time to teach Penelope about the ranch and its operations, taking her with him sometimes when he rode out to check on the cattle or repair sections of fence that had been damaged by winter storms. She learned to spot signs of illness in the animals, and how to judge good grazing land and which plants were poisonous and which were nutritious. It was a whole new world of knowledge, and Penelope absorbed it like a sponge, hungry for skills that would make her useful and give her a sense of purpose. But it was not just the work that made her happy. It was the small moments of connection with Gabriel, the conversations they had over dinner, or while sitting on the porch in the evenings watching the sun set over the desert. He told her stories about his childhood following his father from ranch to ranch, about the things he had learned and the places he had seen. She told him about her own past, slowly opening up about the hardships she had endured and the people who had hurt her. It was painful to talk about, but Gabriel listened without judgment, and somehow, sharing those memories made them feel less heavy, less like scars she would carry forever. One evening in June, after a particularly hot day, they were sitting on the porch drinking lemonade that Martha had made. Gabriel was quiet, staring out at the horizon, and Penelope could tell something was on his mind. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. Gabriel glanced at her, then looked away again. "I received a letter from the territorial marshal today." Cornelius has been arrested, along with Harold Benson and several others who were involved in the indenture scheme. They are going to stand trial in Tucson next month." "That is good news, is it not?" Penelope said, though her stomach had tightened at the mention of Harold Benson's name. "It is," Gabriel agreed. "But the marshal wants you to testify. He says your testimony would be valuable in securing convictions, since you were one of the victims and can speak to how the operation worked. I told him I would discuss it with you, but that the decision was entirely yours." Penelope was silent for a long moment, her hands gripping the glass of lemonade so tightly her knuckles turned white. The thought of seeing Harold Benson again, of standing up in a courtroom and recounting what he had done to her, made her feel sick with fear and anxiety. But another part of her, a stronger part, wanted justice, wanted to see him punished for what he had done not just to her, but to all the other women he had surely victimized over the years. "I will do it," she said finally. "I am terrified, but I will do it. Those men should not be allowed to hurt anyone else." Gabriel reached over and took her hand, his grip warm and reassuring. "I will go with you. You will not have to face them alone. I promise." True to his word, Gabriel accompanied Penelope to Tucson in late July. The journey took 3 days by wagon, and they stayed in a modest hotel near the courthouse. Martha had insisted on coming too, declaring that Penelope needed another woman for moral support, and Penelope was grateful for her presence. The trial was grueling. Penelope spent an entire day on the witness stand, answering questions from both the prosecutor and the defense attorneys, recounting in painful detail how Harold Benson had forced her into indenture and then sold her to Cornelius. The defense tried to discredit her, suggesting that she had agreed to the arrangement willingly and was only claiming otherwise now because she wanted revenge. But Penelope stood firm, her voice clear and steady even when she wanted to break down and cry. Gabriel sat in the courtroom every day, his presence a constant source of strength, and whenever she felt herself faltering, she would look at him and find the courage to continue. Other women testified too, each one telling similar stories of coercion and exploitation, and by the time the trial concluded, there was no doubt in anyone's mind about the guilt of the accused. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning with guilty verdicts on all counts. Harold Benson and Cornelius were both sentenced to 15 years in the territorial prison, and several of their associates received shorter sentences. When the judge read the verdicts, Penelope felt a weight lift from her chest, a burden she had been carrying for so long she had forgotten what it felt like to be without it. That evening, back at the hotel, Gabriel knocked on her door. When she opened it, he was holding a small bouquet of wildflowers he must have picked somewhere in town. "I wanted to congratulate you," he said. "You were incredibly brave today, Penelope. I am so proud of you." Penelope took the flowers, her eyes filling with tears, and without thinking, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. Gabriel froze for just a moment, then his arms came around her, holding her gently but firmly, and she buried her face in his chest and let herself cry, let out all the fear and pain and relief that had been building up inside her for days. "Thank you," she whispered when she could finally speak again. "Thank you for being there. Thank you for believing in me. Thank you for everything." Gabriel's hand came up to stroke her hair, his touch tender and comforting. "You do not need to thank me, Penelope. You did this yourself. You stood up for what was right and you won. That was all you." She pulled back slightly and looked up at him, and the expression on his face took her breath away. There was admiration there and respect, but also something deeper, something that made her heart race. "Gabriel, I need to tell you something." "What is it?" She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I think I am falling in love with you." I did not mean to, and I know it is probably too soon and may be completely inappropriate given how we met, but it is the truth, and I do not want to hide it anymore." Gabriel's eyes widened, and for a moment he just stared at her. Then a slow smile spread across his face, the most genuine and joyful expression she had ever seen from him. "Penelope Lambert, I have been in love with you since about 2 weeks after you came to the ranch. I have been trying so hard not to push you, not to make you feel obligated or pressured, but every day it got harder to keep my feelings to myself. I love your strength and your resilience and your kindness. I love the way you laugh at Martha's jokes and the way you hum when you are working in the garden. I love everything about you, and I have wanted to tell you for months now." Penelope felt a rush of pure joy flood through her. "Really?" "Really," Gabriel confirmed. And then he was kissing her, his lips gentle and warm against hers, and Penelope melted into him, wrapping her arms around his neck and kissing him back with all the emotion she had been holding in for so long. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard and smiling like fools. "I guess this means you are definitely staying at the ranch," Gabriel said, and Penelope laughed, the sound bright and free. "I guess it does." They returned to Quartzsite a few days later, and life at the ranch continued much as it had before. Except now there was no pretense between them, no careful distance. Gabriel courted Penelope properly, taking her on picnics and teaching her to dance in the barn on Saturday nights when the ranch hands gathered for music and socializing. He was patient and respectful, never pushing her further than she was comfortable with, and Penelope found herself falling more deeply in love with him with each passing day. In September, as the brutal Arizona heat began to give way to cooler autumn temperatures, Gabriel asked Penelope to marry him. They were sitting by the creek that ran through the property, watching the water flow over smooth stones, and he pulled a simple gold ring from his pocket and held it out to her. "I know we have not been courting for very long by conventional standards," he said, "but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you, Penelope, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" Penelope looked at the ring, then at Gabriel's face, at the hope and love shining in his gray eyes, and she felt a sense of rightness settle over her, a certainty that this was exactly where she was meant to be and who she was meant to be with. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, I will marry you." They were married in October in a simple ceremony at the ranch, with Martha and the ranch hands as witnesses and the circuit preacher officiating. Penelope wore a dress that Martha had helped her sew, pale yellow with lace trim, and Gabriel wore his best suit and looked so handsome that Penelope could hardly believe he was really hers. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Gabriel kissed her with such tenderness and joy that Penelope felt like her heart might burst. The celebration that followed was simple but joyful, with food and music and dancing that lasted well into the night. Martha cried happy tears and hugged Penelope so tightly she could barely breathe, and the ranch hands clapped Gabriel on the back and congratulated him on landing such a fine wife. It was, Penelope thought, the happiest day of her entire life, made all the more precious because she had never thought she would live to see a day like this. That night, Gabriel carried her across the threshold of their bedroom, and they made love for the first time with a gentleness and passion that left Penelope breathless and amazed. Gabriel was patient and attentive, making sure she was comfortable and cared for, and when they finally lay tangled together in the aftermath, Penelope felt a sense of peace and completion that she had never known was possible. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Gabriel replied, his arms tightening around her. more than I ever thought I could love anyone." As the months turned into years, Penelope and Gabriel built a life together that was everything she had dreamed of and more. The ranch prospered under their joint management, with Penelope taking on more responsibility for the household accounts and business dealings, while Gabriel focused on the livestock and land management. They made a good team, complementing each other's strengths and supporting each other through challenges. In the spring of 1885, Penelope discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with a complex mixture of joy and terror, because she had lost so many things in her life that she was afraid to hope for this. But Gabriel was over the moon with happiness, and Martha fussed over her constantly, making sure she ate properly and got enough rest. Their son was born in November during a cold snap that brought the first frost of the season. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Penelope thought she might not survive it, but Martha and the local midwife guided her through. And when she finally held her baby boy in her arms, all the pain was forgotten in the overwhelming rush of love she felt for this tiny person. Gabriel held his son with trembling hands and tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect," he whispered. "Absolutely perfect. Thank you, Penelope. Thank you for this gift." They named him Thomas, after Gabriel's father, and he grew into a bright and curious child who loved following his father around the ranch and helping with whatever work he was big enough to handle. Penelope watched him grow with a mixture of pride and wonder, marveling at the fact that this beautiful boy was hers, that she had created him with the man she loved. 2 years later, their daughter was born, a little girl with Penelope's dark hair and Gabriel's gray eyes. They named her Rose, and she was as spirited and strong-willed as her mother, keeping them all on their toes from the moment she could walk. The ranch house that had once felt too big and empty now rang with the sounds of children's laughter and running feet, and Penelope could not imagine life any other way. Martha remained with them, becoming a beloved grandmother figure to the children and Penelope's closest friend and confidante. She taught Penelope everything she knew about running a household and raising children, and in return, Penelope made sure Martha felt valued and appreciated, part of the family rather than just an employee. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. Gabriel bought more land and expanded the herd, and by the late 1880s, they were one of the most successful operations in the territory. But success never changed Gabriel. He remained the same steady, honorable man Penelope had fallen in love with, treating everyone with respect and fairness, whether they were wealthy ranchers or struggling homesteaders. Penelope often thought back to that snowy day in February 1883, when she had stood on a platform in Quartzsite thinking her life was over. She thought about how Gabriel had appeared like something out of a dream and bought her freedom, giving her the chance to choose her own path. And she thought about his words to her that day in his study. "Now choose your life." She had chosen this life, chosen Gabriel and the ranch and the family they had built together, and it had been the best choice she had ever made. Sometimes at night, when the children were asleep, and she and Gabriel sat together on the porch watching the stars, she would tell him how grateful she was, how lucky she felt to have found him. Gabriel would always pull her close and kiss her forehead and tell her that he was the lucky one, that she had given him more happiness than he had ever thought possible. And Penelope would rest her head on his shoulder and listen to his heartbeat and feel perfectly, completely content. As the years passed, their children grew. Thomas developed his father's love of horses and skill with animals, and by the time he was 14, he was one of the best young riders in the territory. Rose inherited her mother's sharp mind and business sense, and she could calculate accounts and negotiate deals with an acumen that impressed even hardened businessmen twice her age. In 1892, when Thomas was 7 and Rose was 5, Penelope gave birth to another son. This one they named Michael, and he was a quiet, thoughtful child who loved books and learning. Gabriel built him a special shelf in the house for all his books, and Penelope spent hours reading to him and teaching him everything she knew. Martha passed away peacefully in her sleep in the winter of 1894. Her death hit the family hard, especially Penelope, who had come to think of the older woman as a mother figure. They buried her on a hillside overlooking the ranch, under a cottonwood tree she had always loved, and Penelope planted roses around the grave that bloomed every spring. But life continued, as it always did. Thomas grew into a young man who was the image of his father, tall and strong and honorable. At 19, he fell in love with the daughter of a neighboring rancher, a sweet girl named Sarah who made him laugh and challenged him to be his best self. Gabriel and Penelope gave their blessing, and the young couple was married in the summer of 1897 in a ceremony that reminded Penelope so much of her own wedding that she cried through the entire thing. Rose proved to be just as independent and determined as everyone had expected. She had no interest in marrying young, declaring that she wanted to see something of the world first. With her parents' support, she traveled to San Francisco and Denver, experiencing life beyond the Arizona desert, and returning home with stories and ambitions that made Gabriel both proud and slightly nervous. Michael discovered a talent for drawing and painting, and by the time he was 15, he was creating artwork that captured the beauty and harshness of the desert landscape with stunning accuracy. Gabriel framed several of his paintings and hung them in the house, and Penelope encouraged him to pursue his passion, even if it meant he might not take over the ranch one day. As the new century approached, Gabriel and Penelope found themselves in their 40s, still deeply in love and still working side by side to manage the ranch that had grown into a substantial enterprise. They had weathered droughts and floods, economic downturns and personal losses, but through it all, their partnership had remained strong. One evening in the spring of 1900, they sat on the porch together watching the sunset, just as they had done countless times over the years. Gabriel reached over and took Penelope's hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "You remember that day in the snow?" he asked quietly. Penelope smiled. "I think about it all the time. How could I forget? I think about it too. I think about how close we came to never meeting. How different both our lives would have been if I had ridden through Quartzsite a day earlier or later, if I had not seen what was happening in the town square." He turned to look at her, his eyes still that same clear gray that had first captivated her all those years ago. "I believe we were meant to find each other, Penelope. I believe fate brought us together that day." Penelope leaned over and kissed him softly. "I believe you saved my life that day, Gabriel, and then you gave me a life worth living. I will never stop being grateful for that." "You saved mine too," Gabriel said. "I was so lonely before you came. I had the ranch and I had success, but I did not have love. I did not have family. You gave me all of that. You made me whole." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching as the sky turned from gold to pink to deep purple. In the distance, they could hear Thomas and Sarah laughing at something, and the sound of Michael playing his harmonica drifted from the barn. Rose was due back from her latest trip the next day, and the house would be full of life and noise again. "We have had a good life," Penelope said softly. "The best life," Gabriel agreed. "And it is not over yet. We have many more years ahead of us, many more sunsets to watch together." Penelope squeezed his hand, and they sat together as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. The ranch continued to thrive into the new century. Thomas and Sarah had 3 children of their own, giving Gabriel and Penelope the joy of being grandparents. Rose eventually met a man who matched her spirit and intelligence, a lawyer from Tucson named James who supported her ambitions and treated her as an equal partner. They married in 1903 and split their time between Tucson and the ranch, with Rose continuing to handle much of the business side of the operation remotely. Michael pursued his art, eventually earning enough recognition that his paintings were exhibited in galleries in San Francisco and even New York. But he always came home to the ranch for the holidays, and the walls of the house were covered with his artwork, a testament to his talent and his love for the land where he had grown up. Gabriel and Penelope grew older together, their hair turning gray, their faces lined with the marks of years spent in the harsh Arizona sun. But their love never diminished. If anything, it grew deeper and richer with time, mellowing into something comfortable and enduring that sustained them through the challenges of aging. In the summer of 1915, Gabriel suffered a heart attack while out checking on the cattle. Thomas found him and brought him home, and the doctor said he was lucky to be alive. The incident frightened Penelope terribly, forcing her to confront the reality that they would not live forever, that someday she would have to face life without him. But Gabriel recovered, and though he had to slow down and could no longer work the long hours he once had, he was still able to enjoy his family and his land. He spent more time teaching his grandchildren about ranching and horses, passing on the knowledge he had accumulated over a lifetime. Penelope was grateful for every additional day, every moment they had together. She had learned long ago not to take anything for granted, and she made sure Gabriel knew every single day how much she loved him. On a crisp October evening in 1920, Gabriel and Penelope celebrated their 36th wedding anniversary. Their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a party, and the house was filled with laughter and music and love. Gabriel made a toast, his voice still strong despite his 73 years. 36 years ago, I married the most remarkable woman I have ever known. She has been my partner, my best friend, my love, and the mother of my children. She has made every day of my life better just by being in it. Penelope, I love you more today than I did the day I married you, and I will love you for all the days I have left. Here is to many more years together. Everyone raised their glasses and cheered, and Penelope felt tears streaming down her face as she looked around at all the faces she loved, at the family she and Gabriel had created together. This was what she had chosen, this life, this love, and she would choose it again 1,000 times over. Gabriel lived to see 78, passing peacefully in his sleep on a warm spring night in 1925. Penelope was lying next to him when it happened, and she knew the moment he left her, felt the absence of his presence like a physical blow. She held him close and wept, mourning the loss of the man who had been her everything for more than 40 years. The grief was crushing at first, made bearable only by the love and support of her children and grandchildren, who rallied around her and made sure she was never alone. Thomas took over full management of the ranch, continuing his father's legacy of fairness and innovation. Rose handled the business interests with her characteristic efficiency, making sure Penelope was financially secure. Michael painted a portrait of Gabriel from memory, capturing his strength and kindness and the love in his eyes, and hung it in the place of honor in the living room. As the months passed, Penelope's grief softened into something she could carry, a bittersweet ache that was tempered by gratitude for all the years they had shared. She spent her days tending the garden and helping with the grandchildren, who now numbered 7 and ranged in age from toddlers to teenagers. She told them stories about their grandfather, about the day he bought her freedom in the snow and gave her the chance to choose her life, about the ranch they had built together, and the love that had sustained them through everything. On a February day in 1926, 43 years after that snowy auction in Quartzsite, Penelope walked out to Martha's grave on the hillside and stood looking out over the land she and Gabriel had called home. The ranch spread out below her, prosperous and thriving, a testament to everything they had worked for. In the distance, she could see Thomas working with some of the horses, teaching his oldest son the skills Gabriel had taught him. Rose's car was parked by the house, which meant she was visiting from Tucson. Michael's paintings graced the walls inside, keeping his presence alive even though he now lived in San Francisco most of the year. Penelope closed her eyes and felt the warm sun on her face, felt the gentle breeze that carried the scent of desert flowers and fresh grass. She could almost feel Gabriel standing beside her, his hand in hers, his voice soft in her ear telling her he loved her. "I chose well," she whispered to the wind. "Thank you for giving me that choice. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for the life we built together." She stood there for a long time, at peace with her memories and her grief, grateful beyond measure for the unexpected gift that had come to her on that frozen day so many years ago. She had been auctioned like cattle in the snow, and a cowboy had bought her freedom and told her to choose her life. She had chosen love, had chosen Gabriel and the ranch and the family they created, and it had been the most beautiful choice she could have made. When Thomas came looking for her later, worried when she did not come in for lunch, he found her sitting on the bench Gabriel had built years ago, smiling peacefully with tears on her cheeks. She told him she was fine, just remembering, and he sat beside her and put his arm around her shoulders, and together they looked out over the land that had become their legacy. Penelope lived to see 81, passing away quietly in the winter of 1942, surrounded by her children and many of her grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. Her last words were Gabriel's name, spoken with such love and longing that everyone in the room felt their hearts break and mend at the same time. They buried her next to Gabriel on the hillside, under the cottonwoods that had grown tall and strong over the years, and planted more roses that would bloom every spring, a symbol of the love that had never died. The ranch remained in the family for generations, passed down from parents to children who understood that it represented more than just land and cattle. It represented hope and freedom and the power of love to transform lives. The story of how Gabriel bought Penelope's freedom in the snow became a family legend, told and retold to each new generation as a reminder that even in the darkest moments, unexpected grace could appear, and that choosing love was always worth the risk. Years later, when Thomas's grandson was clearing out the old house to make some renovations, he found a wooden box hidden in the back of a closet. Inside was the crumpled indenture contract Gabriel had taken from Cornelius all those years ago, along with a bundle of letters Gabriel and Penelope had written to each other during their brief courtship, and a journal Penelope had kept during her first year at the ranch. The family gathered to read through these treasures, and they wept and laughed as they discovered the depth of love and courage their ancestors had possessed. In the journal, Penelope had written about that first day, about standing on the platform in the snow and thinking she would die there. She wrote about Gabriel appearing like an answer to a prayer she had not known how to pray, about his words that had changed everything. "Now choose your life." She wrote about falling in love with him slowly, and then all at once, about the moment she knew she wanted to spend the rest of her life with him. about the joy of building something beautiful together from the ashes of her past. And in the final pages, written decades later in her shaky elderly handwriting, she had reflected on the life she had chosen. I was bought for $500 by a man I did not know, and I expected nothing but more pain and suffering. Instead, I found love beyond measure, a family that gave my life meaning and a home that welcomed me with open arms. Gabriel gave me freedom, but what I did with that freedom was my choice. I chose him. I chose this life, and I would choose it again and again forever. This is what it means to be truly free, not to be without chains, but to be able to choose what you will bind yourself to. I bound myself to Gabriel, to this land, to this family, and in doing so, I found the truest freedom of all, the freedom to love and be loved in return. The family carefully preserved these documents, understanding that they were not just historical artifacts, but a testament to the power of human resilience and the redemptive nature of love. The story of Gabriel and Penelope Jennings became more than just a family legend. It became a reminder that no matter how dark the circumstances, no matter how hopeless things seemed, there was always the possibility of grace, always the chance that someone might appear and offer you a different path, and that the bravest thing you could do was take it. The ranch still stands today, though it looks different than it did in Gabriel and Penelope's time. The original house has been preserved as part of the family compound, maintained with care and love by descendants who understand its significance. On clear days, you can stand on the hillside where Gabriel and Penelope are buried and see for miles in every direction, across the desert that once seemed so harsh and unforgiving, but became home to a love story that transcended the circumstances of its beginning. Visitors to the ranch sometimes ask about the two graves under the cottonwoods, about the abundance of roses that bloom there every spring, even in the dry Arizona climate. The current owners tell them the story, about the woman who was auctioned like cattle in the snow, about the cowboy who bought her freedom and told her to choose her life, and about the love that grew between them and flourished for more than 4 decades. They tell about the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who came from that union, about the life they built together from nothing but hope and hard work and unwavering devotion to each other. And sometimes, on cold February nights when the rare Arizona snow falls and blankets the desert in white, people swear they can see 2 figures walking hand in hand across the ranch land. A tall man and a dark-haired woman, still together after all these years, still choosing each other, still in love. It is probably just a trick of the light, just shadows and wishes and the human need to believe that great love stories never really end. But maybe, just maybe, it is something more. Maybe it is proof that when you choose love, when you choose to bind yourself to another person not out of obligation or desperation, but out of genuine affection and respect and partnership, that choice echoes through time, creating ripples that last long after you are gone. Gabriel and Penelope Jennings chose each other, chose love, chose to build something beautiful together despite the ugliness of how they met. And in doing so, they created a legacy that would endure for generations, a testament to the truth that freedom is not just the absence of chains, but the ability to choose what you will become, who you will love, and what kind of life you will build. They chose well, and their choice made all the difference.